Welcome to the Orange World 2020. Welcome to the presentation Take a CyberSOC Ride. My name is Ralph Sekala. I will guide you through the presentation, and in the middle you will see a demonstration moderated by Andreas Günther, my colleague, leader of and head of the CyberSOC in Germany. It will show you an attack and the corresponding detection. And at the end, a short step into the decision self-driven SOC versus managed security service provider driven SOC. So protect versus detect. Nowadays, you can't protect your company network and your environment from any attacks. They can start it from outside, they can be started from inside. So the only way to protect is to disconnect. But disconnection is not our goal. So detection is the key. And a SOC is the way to detect any attacks, and then you can act on either through the SOC as a kind of a response team, or through any department or consultants or whatever. So detection is the goal of a CyberSOC. And a SOC is built in several dimensions. So the first dimension are the people. The people are the center of the SOC. The people are the heart of the SOC. Without an analyst, just with the technologies nowadays, it's not possible to run a SOC. Yes, there needs a second dimension, the technology. Technologies are the tools. So you need the logs, you need a place where you can search, you need dashboards. That's all placed in the technologies dimension. The third dimension are the processes. So you need processes that ensure that you're informed on all changes in the network you try to protect and you try to detect any attacks in. You need the processes, how to interact with other departments, and so processes are very, very useful. And the fourth dimension are the use cases. The use cases are the basic of the daily job. Use cases describe the conditions and the indicators point to a use case, and then you can act on. And to build a SOC, it's a journey, it's a path, and you can display and make a path visible with a map. So we decided to draw the path to build a SOC as a subway map, starting from the center, building a SOC with the four lines, which represent the four dimensions of the SOC, and it's built in layers. So starting from the center, you have to do the preparation. You have to describe the roles, you have to describe the tasks, you have to recruit the people, you have to decide which technology you want to use, which SIEM system, and starting with the first use cases, the low-hanging fruit, the low-hanging use cases, which are mostly describe just a couple of indicators, directly mapping an alarm to a use case from a starting point, and to keep an eye on the number of use cases. Don't start with too many, and the processes. So you need the first processes for the documentation, review existing policies and stuff like that. All this is also part of the SOC and have to be addressed from the startup. Starting with the first lane and the first dimension, the people. The SOC is organized in tiers, tier 1 to tier 3. Those are the analysts, starting from the first responder through the second level, second tier analysts, the more senior ones, and the tier 3 analysts, the threat hunters, the forensic specialists, in some cases also the responders, part of a response team in any way. So those are the hierarchical levels of layers of analysts in a SOC. And beside that, there are also some roles and functions that should be addressed in a SOC with a technical perspective as well as a service perspective, with different tasks they have to cover. And see always the SOC as a kind of a service provider, even if you're running an internal SOC. All your departments, all your subsidiary company parts, your brands, those are customers. So serve them, and that makes it easier to place the roles and function in. And to stuff a SOC, starting with a very small number of hats. So if you want to do stuff each tier with just one hat or one full-time equivalent, so having a full-time equivalent, so to run 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, all through the year, without any out off times and vacations and trainings. That's impossible by a single person. So to staff those 3 FTEs, 1 FTE for each tier level, you have to count with 5 hats. So that's a real minimum with an overlapping skill set and so on. So it's not that easy. The second dimension, the technology. So big data, data lake are the buzzwords that are used for SOC technologies, the CM systems. Yes, it could make it easier if you use a lake for your data, but if there's too much data in, it's hard to search if you don't know what you're looking for. So our approach is more use case approach. So starting from the first use cases, which logs, which events are needed, and collect those logs at first. In some cases, you need agents. If you're not able to forward those logs, example are the Windows server logs without any agents. But log collection is the first step. The second step is to make those logs readable and make them visible. So the visibility on dashboards in searches can only be done if you parse the data, if you normalize the data and index them. It's much easier to walk through those lists instead of walking through raw data. So some additional requirements, unique timestamps and the classification of devices and so on. Those thoughts should be done before you start building a SOC or just before ingesting data, as well as retention time. Are there any sensitive data you have to mask or whatever? And the exit strategy is also part. Or something you have to think about before you ingest the data. Think about how to get them out. So that's for the first part. Now my colleague Andreas Günther run you through the demonstration, attack and detect. and we'll hear you in a couple of minutes.
My name is Andreas Günther. I'm the manager of our CyberSOC in Germany, where I'm responsible for the delivery of our managed detection and response services. Today, I will demonstrate an attack scenario that affects customers who expand their classical on-prem environment with cloud functionality, such as, for example, Office 365. This scenario is based on the analysis of our experts in our CyberSOC. So in this scenario, we will first slip into the role of the attacker to first demonstrate how we can scan the network, move laterally, compromise the network up to the Azure cloud infrastructure, and then finally leak Office 365 credentials. In the second part, we will have a look at the detection of those attack phases, and we will explain how we in the CyberSOC analyze those events. So looking at the attack background, the attack scenario starts under the assumption of a compromised server. Attackers have previously gathered credentials on the host, and now they're looking to further establish their foothold in the company network. They would therefore start scanning the surrounding network until they find an interesting host with an open port, for example, that may or may not allow a remote shell by connecting to the respective network service. So to verify thoroughly, we scan the host and determine that in this case the service WinRM under port 5985 is running by utilizing then the tool evil WinRM. We can spawn a shell given we have the correct credentials, and probably after some failed logins, one of the gathered credentials allows access to the host, and we can spawn a shell with admin rights in this case on this machine. After some initial enumeration, it becomes clear that the attackers have found a domain controller in this case, which is used for cloud authentication. It is connected to the Azure Cloud service with the Microsoft tool Azure AD Connect, which manages the authentication and cloud application against this domain controller's AD. So that's great news for us. In this case, we start to create our own malware, where our goal is to compromise the complete cloud infrastructure and possibly virtualization solution of this company. So we start writing targeted malware designed to interfere with the authentication process. So let's have a look at the functionality of the process. At first, the attacker needs to understand how the authentication process works. The tool Azure AD Connect is a program running on the domain controller. It initially receives an authentication request from Microsoft Azure. The credentials are then decrypted and passed to the Windows API for verification. Then a Boolean value will be passed back, which returns the answer to the Azure cloud. The point in time where the credentials are decrypted and passed to the Windows API is of interest to the attacker, so let's have a closer look at that. Azure AD Connect calls a very specific function named logon user W from the Windows API. The address by which to call these functions are managed in the import address table. AD Connect therefore consults the table for an address to call this function and then passes the credentials onto the function at that address. After processing, the logon user W will return a Boolean value back to the program. So in the execution flow modified by the attackers, the import address table will have an altered address entry for the logon user W function pointing to the attacker's own code, which will lead to a detour whenever the function is called. AD Connect will look up the address of the Windows API function, but it will receive the address of the attacker's code and send the credentials right over there. So in the end of the attacker's code block, they will call the original function to preserve login functionality That way, we as an attacker will stay hidden and not be detected. So in the attacker's code block, the credentials are received as parameters. Next, they are encoded via base 64 and then sent to an external server owned by the attackers via HTTP GET requests. As we've seen on the diagram before, the code block also calls the original hook function in the end to fully preserve the login functionality, so nobody will get suspicious. Now let's look at the delivery. After implementation of the malware, the attackers disguise the files as an update to Azure AD Connect and upload it with WinRM shell. So we also execute the program after delivery to the domain controller, and then we will be able to intercept all logins to the company's domain for cloud-related services, such as, for example, Office 365, as mentioned before, or the Azure Web Console and other system logins, as we can see here. Now we will demonstrate the interception and the exfiltration of the credentials provided to the Microsoft Web Login Console. I'm sure everyone watching has used this before. So after entering the username and password in this case, the request will be sent to the compromised domain controller, take a detour to the attacker's shell and on the left, and is finally exfiltrated to the external server as an HTTP request. At this point, the attacker's process is in place and running, and we can lean back if it wasn't for the analyst in our CyberSOC, of course. So now we'll take a closer look at the detection of those attack phases. As you know, every action by the attacker leaves traces in the company network. So it's always a question of where to look and how to separate relevant log events from background noise. In this case, several events have triggered alerts within the CyberSOC coming from CM, endpoint, and network monitoring tools. In the CM, we can already see a rough timeline of the attack just by looking at the alert names. The port scans here and the failed logins mark the reconnaissance phase of the attack. Then we have the successful logins and the AV detection, which indicates lateral movement and payload delivery. Finally, the exfiltration was detected by the usage of HTTP requests without previous DNS in this case. The events in the EDR tool are worth to take a closer look at, as they reveal the supposed update to the AD Connect agent as malware rather easily. In the EDR tool, we can see two detections for this scenario. First one is about the malware itself. The second one flags the communication to the external server. So here we can see an overview, including a timeline, involved accounts, hosts, and processes. Taking a closer look at one of the core modules used within the attacker's malware, just by looking through the information and the evidence posted here, we can see where the file has been executed or located. We also see a hash we can then use to look it up on VirusTotal, for example, where we see no result, meaning traditional signature-based solutions would not have detected this custom targeted malware due to the signature being unknown. In detection regarding the communication with the external server, we can also see an overview of the involved assets and the timeline. We can even see that the protocol HTTP was used, which matches the CM's alerts of HTTP without DNS. So let's look into the CM further. Here we can see to find out more about the HTTP request, we need to identify the correct log sources. By composing a search using the information we have already identified previously, the analysts are able to find the full HTTP request containing the base 64 encoded strings, which we can see here. We use those strings as base 64 is a method for bidirectional encoding. Those HTTP requests can easily be decoded to reveal all compromised cloud credentials and to get a better understanding of the actual impact of the attack. So after a full analysis of all relevant data connected to this case, the analyst in a CyberSOC can produce a report that contains an accurate timeline, every step of the attack, as well as a list of compromised assets, and of course, cloud accounts.
Welcome back, and I hope you have enjoyed the demonstration. Hopefully you're a bit scared how easy it looks to get the credentials to log into and to exfiltrate those credentials, even including the passwords. So the integration with us and the self-driven versus managed security service provider SOC. So back to the dimensions. So the processes are the third dimension of the SOC. There are many interfaces, many handovers in a process. So the processes can be sorted in operational processes, incident processes, including the run books and so on, reporting, and even the development of use cases should be described in processes, because the fourth dimension are the use cases, and the use cases have to be developed and have to be placed into a life cycle, starting with a reason for use case. So the current threats are mostly the starting point for a use case to develop. So then analyze, do those threats, those risks relate to my environment, and how to identify the indicators. In some cases, it's just a single indicator. In others, there are a bunch of. And then how to monitor those indicators. Are the right sources are added to my CM system? Am I able to detect the related informations? And then starting with the triage, analyze the alerts, set the priorities, and so on. And it's a life cycle. And an example of a use case, the word use case is sometimes used in different ways. So the use case here in the example is detecting suspicious outbound traffic. And that can indicate an infected endpoint. So one indicator is the firewall log with a threat intelligence. That's the easiest indicator, or the easiest to implement, because here's the information directly in the log, in the alert. Or you have to do a correlation with the with DNS, for example, or the proxy logs, where it can use the size of an outbound HTTP traffic as an indicator. So you see, it's a couple of indicators just for a single use case, and not the number of use cases makes a SOC very useful and good. It's sometimes, in our case, it's some more than 20 of those use cases, if they describe all those threats and the risks, and you can see it on a daily basis as a thumbnail, where you put all those events and and alarms in, and the use cases reduces the numbers of indicators you have to monitor. So you don't have to monitor all those millions or thousands of events. You just have to monitor those indicators, and then they can drive you to the right use case and the right runbook to act on. So that's a short description of those 4 dimensions of a SOC. And the final question is, should I run my own SOC, or should I run a SOC with an MSSP? There's some pros and cons on both sides. And as a conclusion, on the one side, we have the custom-specific knowledge. And on the other side, we have the MSSP with a wider view on different customers, on many customers. So there are pros and cons in the daily business, in the skills, the tools that can be used, as well as on the coverage. It's hard to stuff 24/7 SOCs for an internal usage. And that's the benefit of running a SOC by an MSSP, but there are always some internal resources, internal knowledge and skills and people needed. The MSSP analysts can interact with. They just can analyze, they can detect, but they have to send and respond on those alarms to the customer, to you, to react on it. In most cases, a SOC isn't able to isolate and quarantine any clients. So thanks for your attention, and hopefully you enjoyed, and see you in the next presentation.